hence the extensive training and experience that's required in order to actually qualify someone for a role. So the implications of this are twofold. The first is that there's talent scarcity. So design services can be very expensive. So from the business side of things, this results in corporations unable to meet their business needs, startups or smaller organizations incurring design debt because they can't afford to prioritize the expertise. But the second and arguably more important impact of this is that there's a severe lack of diversity and representation, which then results in non-inclusive products that are often of lower quality as a result of that. Hence the extensive training and experience that's required in order to actually qualify someone for a role. So the implications of this are twofold. The first is that there's talent scarcity. So design services can be very expensive. So from the business side of things, this results in corporations unable to meet their business needs, startups or smaller organizations incurring design debt because they can't afford to prioritize the expertise. But the second and arguably more important impact of this is that there's a severe lack of diversity and representation, which then results in non-inclusive products that are often of lower quality as a result of that. The lack of explicit rules for our visual design language is one of the very key things that makes it that much more difficult to learn. Hence the extensive training and experience that's required in order to actually qualify someone for a role. So the implications of this are twofold. The first is that there's talent scarcity. So design services can be very expensive. So from the business side of things, this results in corporations unable to meet their business needs, startups or smaller organizations incurring design debt because they can't afford to prioritize the expertise. But the second and arguably more important impact of this is that there's a severe lack of diversity and representation, which then results in non-inclusive products that are often of lower quality as a result of that. As mentioned, my name is Parisa Bazl, and I'm head of user experience design at Commvault Systems, which is an IT software company, a large B2B enterprise software publicly traded corporation. So today I'm going to be giving a talk called Design Systems of Change, and it's about how we can utilize design methodologies to create equitable employment opportunities within the design world. So I've been working in the field of user experience design for about 12 years now. The primary focus has been on B2B SaaS apps. And I have a lot of, I guess the expertise is when it comes to integrating design into the overall product development cycle as a fundamental part of it. But I never really planned on working in technology. I found my way into it by way of medieval and early modern literature. So I studied a lot of Shakespeare, Dante, and Chaucer in undergrad. And I had a very related interest in the evolution of language. So I'd like to get back to my roots today and start this talk by exploring some of the parallels between written language and design. So language, at its most obvious, it's the thing that helps us express ourselves. But more accurately, language is a framework by which we organize and process our experiences as we take them in. And we utilize that same framework to communicate our thoughts outwardly so that we can create connections. So there's this like very reciprocal arrangement between the language that we use and how we perceive the world. So for example, if our language only has two words for gender, he and she, then we subconsciously cultivate a viewpoint of the world in that same binary. So if you were to describe to me an application that you want to build, there are a couple of different ways that I could document these requirements. Most obviously, I could write them down, but being that I'm a designer, the other option I have is to draw them. So I could map out user flows for scope, and I could create screens that reflect content and functions. And these tactics also crystallize requirements, but instead of words, I'm using pictures. So the former method, the written one, it translates the spoken word into a written language, and the latter translates the spoken word into a visual language. So like all languages, only a subset of the population is fluent in visual design, like many of us here. So I'm talking specifically about visual design that's used for digital experiences, right? And being fluent in this language is valuable in several ways. So for one, we can charge money for it. But even more importantly, we can play an active part in the evolution of technologies that shape our collective human experiences, similar to how the spoken language does on our mindsets. The visual language is generally inaccessible without a certain level of affluence. In order to become fluent in this language, we not only need to access a computer and expensive software, but we also need experiences that bring us into the world of software development. So these typically take the form of higher education. And if said higher education isn't directly related to design, then we usually require additional and costly formal training as well. So these are significant barriers to entry, and that means that design is confined oftentimes to a homogenous group of people. And so this tends to have very unfortunate effects. Wealth gaps that are based on race, gender, and other social factors are exacerbated by technology that's designed without appropriate representation. We end up with facial recognition software that incorrectly identifies Black people, financial experiences that don't account for the unbanked, search algorithms that reinforce racism, and face filters that often promote stereotypes. So none of these things are necessarily intentional, but they also aren't accidents. So just building on what I spoke about before with these parallels between written and design language, we can go back to written language a little bit and look at letters, right? They're the basis of our written language. And we put different letters together to make words. So words are then assigned meaning based on what they represent. And words also become much more meaningful when they're arranged with other words into sentences. Like letters, front-end components such as checkboxes, drop-downs, grids, things like that are the basis of our visual software language. So we put the most granular components together to make more complex ones, like how a checkbox and a drop-down can be combined to make a multi-select drop-down. And similar to words, components are also assigned meaning based on what they represent. So for example, a multi-select dropdown is empty until we fill it with a list of countries that the user can select if they're specifying their origin for like a profile or something like that. But because the written language has been around a lot longer than the digital design one, we have established methods for formatting it. So spelling rules and grammar rules are often what help us ensure that we're putting letters and words together in ways that make sense. And we learn different sounds that different symbols make, that adjectives go before nouns. We learn about present and past tense. And knowing these things means that we can create increasingly complex words and sentences to make paragraphs, stories, whatever from there. But by contrast, the language of digital design lacks these clear spelling and grammar rules. So you can see here, like the fact that there are so many iterations on what is essentially the same thing is indicative of the idea that like, while we may have a general agreement on high level best practices as an industry, we don't have an established set of specific rules that govern component arrangement into patterns. And the lack of explicit rules for our visual design language is one of the very key things that makes it that much more difficult to learn. Hence the extensive training and experience that's required in order to actually qualify someone for a role. So the implications of this are twofold. The first is that there's talent scarcity. So design services can be very expensive. So from the business side of things, this results in corporations unable to meet their business needs, startups or smaller organizations incurring design debt because they can't afford to prioritize the expertise. But the second and arguably more important impact of this is that there's a severe lack of diversity and representation, which then results in non-inclusive products that are often of lower quality as a result of that. So how do we really attack or meet this challenge of design literacy? So again, like, let's say that we're given the directive to make as many people literate in the written language as possible. And we are able to do it by any means necessary. It's carte blanche, right? If our aim is scale, then you really have to think about what's our biggest leverage point. Should we only consider tactics that promote teaching the rules, we'd be focused on getting more funding for learning centers or educational initiatives and things like that. But if we shift our focus to simplifying how written language is constructed so that it becomes easier to learn, we'd be able to be effective for many more people. So in short, if we want to make as many people literate in the shortest amount of time possible, we should change the way that we spell, or rather simplify the rules that govern our language. For example, while we do have spelling rules that dictate which letters represent which sounds, those rules can change or get confusing. There are so many examples of this convolution. Once I point it out to you, you'll probably never be able to stop seeing it. But many of them are demonstrated in this word technology, where the K and the J sounds are indicated using different combinations of letters. The context of the surrounding letters often changes the sounds into something totally different. So if we're exceptionally fluent in the English written language, then we understand this and we recognize it without actually thinking about it. But if we're unfamiliar and we're trying to learn it, we would sound out all of these words possibly totally differently. The same notion applies to our visual language as well. While our components, or our letters, right, are pretty established, our rules for putting them together are not. But if we can create a simple, replicable set of rules that generate predictable outcomes, we can make visual design that much easier to learn, therefore reducing costs and creating opportunities. So this is just how we might think about design, right, in a way that we would incorporate into our design systems, and essentially just sort of our overall framework of design. So we've reached a point in the technical age where redundancy is actually a very key part of digital design. The reason that many digital experiences resemble each other is because it's important to leverage learned behavior in order to make a more usable experience. It's not to say that these things can't be evolved, like in terms of what Google initially did to search, and honestly, like what TikTok is doing to it now. But it only means that once something has proven to work really well, it should be used so that we can focus on other areas that are worth innovating on. So it's basically like the digital equivalent of not reinventing the wheel, right? We might make improvements to adapt to changing conditions, but evolving our modes of transportation has been much more dependent on other aspects of the transportation experience, such as the engine or the actual container that you're moving in. Common patterns like these are things that designers tend to know because of their experience. So it's like we can read the words, but we don't necessarily think about how they're spelled so that we can teach other people. So we need to shift our focus from writing the words or creating the designs to writing the rules for writing the words. The next frontier about UX design in general, it's less about what we design and it's much more about how we design. So a quick scan of different design systems like Material or Polaris shows us that our means of putting components together are inconsistently documented. So while we might have general agreement on high-level best practices, as an industry, we don't necessarily have an established set of specific rules that govern component arrangements. My team and I have been very conscientious about how we design and recording that within our own design system. So we wanted to better integrate design into the overall development process and externalize the logic, like the logical framework that we use that in doing so will make our design decisions explicit. So we took concepts from object-oriented programming and we applied them to our patterns. So our templates, like our page, like common patterns, they're organized according to CRUD principles. And as well as data context. So when I say CRUD, it's an acronym that stands for essentially like possibilities for what the user can be doing. They can be creating an object, which means adding it, right? They can be retrieving it, so they can be searching or filtering it. They can be updating it or editing it, or they can be deleting it or removing it. So again, just like this concept of, or this acronym of CRUD. And then we cross-reference that with the data context. So that means like the level in the data hierarchy where this action is taking place. So is it taking place on a main object? Is it taking place on a group of objects? Or is it taking place on a reference or a child object that has a parent? So answering these things helped us determine the arrangement of different components that we needed, and helps us sort of drill down to the correct pattern using the systematic logical framework. What is the CRUD action and where is that action taking place, right? And that is, kind of a high level overview of it. There's a lot of like nuances that go into it, but for the purposes of sort of demonstrating this within the talk, at its most simplest, that's really sort of the state that we're starting in. So when it comes to my duties as a UX leader, I'm a big believer in two things. The first is that it is my responsibility to achieve scale across an organization. That means that I need to make the design team as effective as possible while also keeping costs as low as possible. So I prefer to think of this as like you have to pay people the right amount, what they deserve, but you also need to pay the right amount of people, especially the right amount of people as it relates to the roles that you need. The second thing that I really take on is that I need to help diversify the field as much as possible in order to protect us against a dystopian future where technology just exacerbates inequality as opposed to minimizing it. So at my current organization, to scale my team, to scale in order to meet internal demand, right? I was looking at an additional 4 headcount, which according to, certain like job reference sites or whatever, that would run me anywhere from 240 to 320 annually, maybe. I'm in the New York City metro area. So I could potentially outsource this overseas for cheaper costs, but the quality would often suffer with me juggling multiple time zones. And I would also, more importantly, be taking opportunities away from local economy, right? So I wanted an alternative resourcing option that would be a cost-effective investment for the company and for our surrounding community. So we saw our design system as a key means to scale our abilities as a UX org, right? The purpose of any design system is really to generate consistency while also optimizing the UX for very specific use cases. So when we infuse it with these object-oriented principles, it means that we can create a clear picture of the logical framework by which we design. Again, like that decision-making process for how you ultimately like spell a word or write a sentence, right? So in doing so, we were able to open up the opportunity to join our team to people who had zero user experience design skills. So we partnered with a nonprofit. They provide professional readiness skills to youth who have non-traditional educational backgrounds and who come from households of a certain income within the New York City metro area. And we sourced our candidates through them. And then through them, we also were able to utilize money that came through government funding, actually. So we could pay these UX students to train with us for 175 hours that were zero cost to the company that I work for. Of course, we did have to provide a senior level person to train them. But if you time that right within the development cycle, you can typically pull it off. And then on top of it, it also sort of gave people management experience that they were looking for, that they hadn't had an opportunity to have yet. So this really reduced our onboarding time, and it also made it a lot less intimidating to meet headcount should we need to expand the team even further. So after they were done with training, we brought them on for 40 hours a week for 6 months, which has since been extended, actually. So that's been really effective for us in general. So really, like, not only do we strengthen our organization by employing from a diverse candidate pool, but we also save ourselves from a business side, like lots of money in salaries with candidates that these ones, we've actually been able to vet them for several weeks prior to taking them on. So we vetted them throughout the training, right? And they also had the additional support from the nonprofit that they came from in terms of just the kind of like, a steady backbone in terms of like integrating into this new environment, especially with us being remote. So multiple studies will show too that this has long-term benefits on cost as well, because when we provide training for people, it also helps to cultivate loyalty and it often results in lower attrition rates. But I think most importantly, like we were able to create access to opportunities to work in software design. So, maybe not all of these newly minted designers will stay with us forever. Maybe other companies will interest them or other aspects of product development, right? But the point is that by making it easier to learn how to design, we're not only able to alleviate our own concerns about resourcing, but we can help all kinds of people contribute to the evolving digital ecosystem. So yeah, I'm really excited to share that with you. It's been a very fun journey, I would say, for all of us, and it's been very impactful on from both a business standpoint as well as a personal one, for myself and for the interns and the other designers that were involved with it. I think you're muted again, Catherine.
I'll learn. Thank you so much, Parisa. That was fantastic. Really interesting. I think for me, it breaks it into multiple different parts, really. So I wanted to go back to the program that you had for hiring people, because that to me was, I've never actually heard of it. In Ireland, they do something similar, but I've never seen a tech company actually utilize it and actually go to the effort of training people and building it out. What has been where is the project now? What is how many months was it in? How long has this been going on for within the company?
Yeah, so we're almost at the year mark, actually. So, we're looking at possibly opening up full-time positions and stuff, sort of just depending on budget and things like that. But either way, portfolio preparation for some of these folks. It's been going on for quite a while, and they're all fully operational. Even by the end of training, we actually had them. They work under the direction of a senior designer, acting manager. So they were all pretty fully operational, working a little bit more as groups towards the beginning, but now they're pretty independent on projects, and they're also able to leverage a lot of the knowledge that they've built up over the past several months as well, right? So they know our product pretty well at this point, and have some working relationships and stuff, and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, a year is phenomenal. And this might be too early of a question, but have you looked at stats from the point of view of the retention rate for employment? Is it higher or lower? Do you have a gut feel on that as of yet than say a traditional high-paying standard UX route?
Yeah, they're all very committed, at this point. And so what we're trying to do is, I think from a business perspective, right, like you could really keep these people on for quite a long time. And it's really impactful and helpful to the business. Our cost per project has gone down 75%, and our output has gone up over 67%. So as a team, we've been able to generate these outputs and iterate and things like that much more quickly. From a human perspective, I'm not interested in stringing people along if there wouldn't be a legitimate full-time role for them. I think that after a year's worth of intern work in this field, you can stand up, you've got some projects that you can really count on. And so we're looking at possibilities of full-time employment here, or just giving them some training in terms of, like I said, putting a portfolio together, speaking to work, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's had a huge impact on the business. It's also from a diversity standpoint. It was a small recruitment pool. We brought 4 people on, but we have 50% Hispanic, which is so much higher than your average Hispanic, like Latino, like in terms of the tech industry as a whole. And then, I think the big thing for us has also been the age component, because especially in enterprise software, there's a huge percentage of people that are 45 plus, which it's great, in a lot of ways. But I think, especially at the types of companies that I work for, they do need to be very conscientious of how they're sort of cultivating that next generation of talent. So I think that's been very important for us as well.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal, and it's something I think a lot of companies could learn from. And yeah, when I asked the question on how long the longevity of and the turnover, I probably meant more from the yes them, but also more from the organization. Would they be let go or not utilized? As you said, you're doing them a service by training them up. They're now qualified. It's a stepping stone. I was just curious on how tough and rigid you would be on the maintaining them into a full-time position. So
Yeah.
yeah, no.
Yeah, there's a couple of factors less in my control there, but that is something that's being pushed for, not just by me, obviously as well. I think the DE&I, like there's a lot of aspects of the business that have a vested interest in this. So we're quite hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on a company-wide perspective, have you anything in terms of profitability? You mentioned numbers there of 75% reduction in rates. Do you see that directly as a result of this, or are there any other factors?
Oh no, that's pretty much a direct result of this. Yeah. Like I said, I mean, we grew our headcount in this way. And so it was really impactful. Like we have a senior designer kind of helping manage all their work and getting the projects off the ground and stuff. And so not only are we able to take on, a higher quantity of projects, but we're also able to complete them more quickly, because what was a more senior heavy team previous to this, they don't have to do as much context switching now. Like they're not juggling as many projects and things like that. So we've been able to be super focused, like in lockstep with the PMs and the engineers that are involved with each project. And so it's really as a whole just helped us push things out that much more efficiently and effectively, So yeah, it's really been a direct result of that, because even if people aren't working directly with these folks, like some of the other senior designers on the team, they're still getting the tangential benefits of not having to juggle so many things, take on so many things at once. Yeah, so it's great for everybody.
No, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And is there any opportunities to scope it outside? Has the wider organization looked at it in terms of going beyond UX or design?
Yeah, they have. They're seeing this as a really significant success story. I think that I know that in product management, for example, there's a lot of need there, right? And the same as development. I think that where the challenge is, the key to this was really that we were able to externalize like a framework for people to follow. That framework doesn't capture every single nuance. There are things that you can only just learn on the job,
Yeah.
but it is a really critical starting point. Like it gets you there. And so I think the challenges and the opportunities with the other roles are to really look at like, what can we distill into a framework that would actually prove for very effective like training and onboarding within the 175-hour budget. So that's something I would love to collaborate on those teams on, on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes it's a little challenging to do that, but there is definitely interest in it. And I think that, it would just require a little bit more partnership. But just being that I'm a designer and, working with my team, like for us, that came very naturally. So for this part of it.
Yeah, phenomenal from start to finish. So thank you very much for sharing that and for your insights.
For changing the ways that you work. But as with all things product development related, there is no one size fits all. So please do share your thoughts in the comment section below, and let's keep the conversation going. Finally, if this video resonated with you, please do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. This not only keeps you up to date with all of our latest content, but it also helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Last, if you want to keep learning, we have a couple of videos suggested here. But otherwise, until next time, take care and enjoy the rest of your day.